Tonight, we're going to be continuing our webinar series with caring for holiday houseplants, which is kind of the right timing for that with Thanksgiving just next week. I don't know how that's happened, but with Thanksgiving and Christmas and different holidays coming up, now is the time to be thinking about these things. So we will go ahead and roll on. So the plants that we're going to talk about tonight: Amaryllis, holiday cactus, Kalanchoe, Norfolk, island pine, and poinsettia. Some of you might have heard of some of these and some might be new. So hopefully we'll get some good info for you. The Amaryllis is the first thing we're going to talk about. This is the bloom of several different types of Amaryllis. Very, very pretty. The bottom right-hand corner, that's probably the most common type of bloom, but there's lots of different options. The Amaryllis is native to South America. So it's a tropical plant and is not cold hardy. So a lot of times we will see Amaryllis around Christmas time, and you'll see the bulbs in the store to grow. And it is tropical, so it's not going to survive outside, but it makes a wonderful addition to your indoors during the winter months. Oh, I will mention, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type those in the chat box and we will get to those at the end of the lesson. So for the Amaryllis, the growing conditions can be potted or repotted anytime after the plants have gone through a dormant or rest period. And that just kind of mimics what would happen in their natural state. You're going to plant them in containers that are only slightly larger than the bulb. So very different than a lot of other plants that we like to grow. They actually prefer to be root bound. Hopefully you can see in the picture that the bulb is pretty much the same size as that pot. So that's kind of what we're going for with Amaryllis. We want to be sure that we have drainage holes in the pots. They do not like, they are a bulb. So just like a tulip or anything like that, they don't like to, they need good drainage so they don't rot. Amaryllis are sun loving. Remember, they are a tropical plant. They will grow best indoors in a sunny window. And if you have the option, it's good for that to face west or south, that window, because that's going to allow you the most sunlight during these winter months when we don't have a lot of sunlight. Temperatures should be for good root development between 70 and 75 degrees. And if they're in a sunny window in your home, that shouldn't be a problem. Once the flowers start to open, 65 degrees will help prolong flower life. Of course, we don't expect you to adjust your thermostat, but that's just kind of the recommendations. For the media or the growing potting mix that you are in, an Amaryllis, plant the Amaryllis with about 1/3 to 1/2 of the bulb out of the soil, like the picture shows. This keeps the nose of the bulb dry, reducing fungal diseases, which can happen easily with bulbs. The soil medium should be a high quality sterilized potting soil. So any potting mix that you are going to be purchasing from the store would have been sterilized, and that's going to be fine. You see the little gravel on the top. A lot of people, since the bulb is kind of showing through, they'll put some little decorative gravel on the top just to kind of cover up that soil, and it just kind of adds for the appearance. So watering and fertilizing, whenever we're talking about houseplants, it's a little bit different than growing things inside. So again, we're going to be going some very specific things, but just try to do your best as you grow these different plants. So with water and fertilizer, we want to water thoroughly after planting and then keep it slightly moist until flowering. Generally, once per week is adequate, but don't let it become dry while flowering. Depending on how much sun we're getting at that time and how much sun comes through that window, you might have to water a little bit more often than once a week. If we have a lot of cloudy days, it might be longer. You can go longer than a week without watering. Do not fertilize a bulb with no leaves, because the fertilizer can actually burn that bulb. So we want those leaves to be developed before we even think about fertilizer with an Amaryllis bulb. Once the leaves are growing, then you can fertilize the bulb twice per month with any all-purpose water-soluble plant food. Not promoting Miracle-Gro, but those are the good pictures that we can find. So you'll see some pictures throughout here that are going to be Miracle-Gro based. That brand is very easy to find, but it certainly does not have to be that brand. There's lots of brands on the market that will work. With the Amaryllis, after its flower, so it's flowering, keep the plants actively growing even after they finish blooming. You can cut off the flower stalk just above the bulb. It is essential that you keep your Amaryllis actively growing. This makes the bulb bigger and increases the flower number and size. If you've ever had an Amaryllis before, sometimes people, might bloom once and then you've struggled with getting it to bloom again. Part of that is we want to keep it actively growing. Continue growing the Amaryllis for 8 to 10 months. You can acclimate them in the spring slowly and allow them to grow outdoors. So we've had them inside for the cold months. If you want to put them outside, you certainly can transition them. Or you can keep them indoors all year long. It's totally up to you. And then, of course, when winter and cold weather comes around, we're going to want to bring those in again, just like we would any houseplants that are sitting out on our porch. So for reflowering, sometimes this is the struggle. In August, we want to stop watering and fertilizing the bulb. Okay, the leaves will gradually turn yellow and brown over several weeks. And what's happening here is we are kind of mimicking that dormancy period that would happen in nature if it were growing in South America. The leaves will gradually turn yellow and brown over several weeks. We want to leave it dormant for 8 to 10 weeks. So that includes the time when you stopped your watering. After this dormant time, you can repot the bulb and begin watering and the flowering process will begin all over again. So again, we're mimicking that dormancy period that I mentioned on a couple slides ago. And that's where a lot of people kind of struggle. So that's it for the Amaryllis. I will mention too, some of this information, like I said, is very specific. I will be happy to email out the slideshow or anything like that. If anybody is interested in that, we could cover that at the end of the session. But I want to go ahead and mention that because I don't want you to be thinking that you have to write all of this down feverishly. And this is also being recorded. Okay, so that was the Amaryllis, which is absolutely beautiful. And another plant that a lot of times we see this time of year are holiday cactus. I have one in my office right here. I've never had a whole lot of, it was in a poor location. So it's finally blooming this year a little bit, and I've got some little buds that I'm pretty excited about. And it is a Thanksgiving cactus. So I'm hoping in the next, week or so that I get a few more blooms. But holiday cactus, very, very pretty. A lot of times people will hand these down generation to generation, and they're absolutely beautiful, come in lots of different colors, and a great addition to your house, especially in these cold, dreary months that are ahead. So there are some different categories of cactus, of holiday cactus, and a lot of times people will just call it Christmas cactus, and that's not always accurate. So one of the most common is actually Thanksgiving cactus, and they are a lot of times sold as a labeled Christmas cactus, but they technically are not. They're actually a Thanksgiving cactus, and that's what I have here in my office. But the Thanksgiving cactus, they naturally bloom around Thanksgiving, and then they'll continue to do so a lot of times until Christmas. So I think that's why the name gets a little bit confused. But if you'll notice, hopefully you can see here, the edges of the Thanksgiving cactus are going to be kind of pointed. If you know Batman and the bat signal, the top of a Thanksgiving cactus, the end of the leaf, that's what it reminds me of. So it's kind of pointed. But that's a Thanksgiving cactus, as opposed to a Christmas cactus. It's going to have flatter leaves, and the teeth around the edges are not pointy. They are more rounded. And that can be a little bit confusing, and it's not end of the world if somebody calls it the wrong thing. But just for your information, the Thanksgiving cactus has the pointy teeth, and the Christmas cactus has more of a rounded edge. There's also an Easter cactus, and it has pointed teeth, but it has hairs at the leaf joint. So hopefully you can see these little hairs here. And it has more of what I consider like a traditional cactus look, like what a cactus that you would see out in in the West growing in Arizona on its own. It just has more of that texture to it. So the Easter cactus is typically will bloom around Easter time. Looks a little bit different, but you can hopefully see how those three kind of get easily mixed up. A little bit of history of the holiday cactus. They got their names because of the time that they bloom, as we mentioned. Thanksgiving and Christmas cactus, they're in the same genus, so they're very closely related. All holiday cactus, they can grow in trees or they can actually grow on rocks, which is pretty cool. All are native to the mountains of Brazil, as we mentioned, from like the Amaryllis is from South America, and then we have our southern friends from Brazil as well that the holiday cactus comes from. They were in cultivation in Europe by 1818, depending on the species. That kind of depended on what year that actually happened, but they were starting to be cultivated in the early 1800s. So they've been around for quite some time. And then hybrids were actually on the market by the 1850s. So their development with cultivation went pretty quickly. So growing conditions for the holiday cactus, they are considered a tropical plant. Again, they are from Brazil, a warmer climate, and they are a perennial, and they are also, for us, a house plant. They are a perennial and tropical when we have them indoors. The flowers on the plant bloom generally once a year, and they come in a huge varieties of color. They can get different sizes. Depending on their growing conditions is going to kind of determine how large they will get. My aunt has a bay window that faces, I think it faces south, but it must be the absolute perfect place for her Thanksgiving cactus because it is massive and beautiful every single year. They can reach 12 to 18 inches tall. And again, those growing conditions are going to, mine doesn't get nearly the light that it needs in this office. So it stays a little bit smaller. The Christmas cacti or Thanksgiving cacti, they need to be kept in a sunny location while inside. They can be moved outside in the summer, just like the Amaryllis, but they need to be kept in a shady or semi-shady area. So kind of protected. Ideal temperatures during the growth period from April to September, when we might be taking them outside, is 70 to 80 degrees. A lot of times it's a lot warmer than that here. So most people would just keep them inside, but if you have a covered porch or something like that, then you might be able to accommodate this condition. So we're going to talk about growing media again. Growing media is anything that the plant is growing in. So they're going to grow best when they're somewhat pot bound. Again, similar to the Amaryllis, requires repotting only about every 3 years. Mine was super little from a cutting that I had. That's how it was started, and it was extremely pot bound, and it was much happier after I repotted it. But now it's not going to need repotted for probably 2 or 3 years. But there does become a point that it needs a little bit of room to grow. It's kind of grown out of its space. So keep that in mind. You can mix your own soil or you can buy it pre-mixed. If you wanted to mix your own, you're going to have sand or perlite for drainage. Potting, just regular potting mix like with peat moss. 2 parts of peat moss, or just buy a mix for cacti. So again, not promoting Miracle-Gro, but over here to the right, that brand as well as others do have potting mix that is specific for cacti, palm, and citrus, and it is a very good combination, and I highly recommend it, and it's easier than making your own, quite frankly. Do not use any media that has clay or any dirt, soil that was outside from your garden. We don't want that. We need it to be very light and airy. And the pot, as with most plants, needs to have proper drainage. When we are watering our holiday cactus, we want to water when the growing medium is dry to the touch. So we don't want it to get bone dry, but we don't want it to stay wet. We want it dry to the touch. During the summer, cacti are tolerant of slighter, drier conditions like they would in their natural habitat. Never let plants become waterlogged, especially in the winter. In the winter, a lot of times we're not getting as much sun. It's not going to dry out as quickly. So we want to really, really monitor our watering so that we don't overwater. Overwatering is just as harmful as underwatering. Plant must not dry out when in bud or bloom stage, because constantly moist is a must or bloom drop will occur. I have learned that the hard way when mine have been in bloom and then I'm off for a few days for vacation or holidays or things like that. So we don't want it wet, but we do want to keep that moist, especially in the bloom stage, or we will lose our blooms. Fertilizing with the holiday cactus, we can start fertilizing in late winter or early spring as any new growth starts. Throughout the summer, maintain a 1/2 strength of a well-balanced soluble fertilizer. There are houseplant fertilizers that work great for this. Holiday cacti have a higher requirement for magnesium than other plants. So if you have anything that's looking a little strange, we might need to add a little bit of magnesium to make that plant a little healthier. Stop fertilizing in late summer and you will get a better bloom production. Some issues that can happen: basal stem rot, and you can see that in this top picture, and you'll get this rotting that will occur. A lot of times it is from, it's at the soil line and the tissue dies. And a lot of times that's from keeping this too wet. Remember, we said that we want to have moisture, but we do not want it to be, we don't want it to be wet. And then botrytis blight, flowers will die and become covered in a gray fungal growth. And it's really, really easy to see. It happens on a lot of plants, especially house plants or cut flowers. And a lot of times that is from not enough airflow or it was staying too wet. Another issue is mealybugs or scale. Sometimes these come with you from the nursery where you have purchased, but you can use chemical control, and you can see these on here. Mealybugs and scale, you can use a chemical control that is for houseplants and just monitor before it gets to this stage where you have a lot of insect damage going on. After the flowering of the holiday cacti, we want some bright light. So, and again, this is going to be pretty good with our schedule. We want some long nights. 14 hours or more of continuous darkness each day is required before a flower bud set will occur. Long nights should be started in the middle of September and continued for at least 6 continuous weeks for complete bud set, which in September, our days start to get shorter and our nights start to get longer. So it works pretty well with our calendar. As little as 2 hours of interrupted lighting will inhibit flower bud set. So you can, you can cover this or have it in a dark area or have it in a room where the light is, not turned on or out of the window. You can alter this, or you can just let nature handle it, and you might not have as many buds and blooms. Buds normally will be visible in 3 to 4 weeks. The photo period, which is the length of day or the length of light, it has no effect on flowering once the buds are set. So if you've had issues, if you have a holiday cactus and you've had issues with it flowering in the past, we might not be getting this light time period right for getting those buds to set. So that's something to consider that you might be able to manipulate within your own home. Fall growing temperatures should be kept between 60 and 68 degrees, ideally, but as close to 68 as possible for maximum flower production. That's pretty common for what's going to be inside of our house temperature anyway. So that's pretty easy. Plants grown with night temperatures between 50 and 59 will set flower buds regardless of day length. So if you're worried about the day length and covering with light and all of that, maybe just set it in a cooler area at night to help those buds start. Pinch back stems in early June if you need to promote branching and more terminals, more ends for flowers. You can also pinch end of September to remove any stem segments that are less than a ½ inch long. You can make all stems approximately the same length, and that just kind of helps shape the plant. These short and immature stem segments will not initiate flower buds until they are mature. After it's removed, a flower bud forms on the previous, more mature stem segment, so what was already there. The Easter cactus bloom when coming out of dormancy in spring and don't need the above treatments except pinching to get more blooms. So again, lots of instructions for high quality holiday cactus. You might just be like my aunt who just puts it in her window and does absolutely nothing to it other than pinch it every now and then, and it turns out beautiful. But if you've had issues, then these might be some steps that you can try. Holiday cactus are extremely easy to propagate. You literally just snip them off. Whenever I repotted my plant a couple months ago, then I had 2 or 3 little segments fall off, and I just stuck them in some potting soil, and they're going to root and do great. So in May or June, pinch off the sections of the stem with 3 to 5 stem segments, and each stem segment, what that means is right here, like this little leaf, that's a stem segment. This is a stem segment. This is a stem segment. So you're going to pinch off here where it has 3 to 5 stem segments. If it breaks off on its own, you can, like just this one little guy, you can still try to grow it, and a lot of times they'll still grow. Allow segments to heal or callus by placing them outdoors in the shade for a day or 2. Or if they fell off, they probably have already calloused, and then you can just stick them in some potting mix. Place 3 cuttings in a 4-inch pot. That's just a suggestion. Cut the end, or the cut end should be in the soil about 1 inch deep. Water the pots and place in a clear plastic bag loosely over the plant and secure to the pot with a rubber band. This, you're kind of creating a little greenhouse. Place plant in indirect light until rooted, which is about 3 to 8 weeks. And you can also root cuttings in water. In this picture here, they've used an egg carton with some potting mix and just stuck that in there. That totally works. Okay, you can be as complex or as simple as you want to make it, but they do root pretty well by cuttings. Okay, so that's it for the holiday cactus. Next is Kalanchoe. People say that word differently. Kalanchoe is the way that I was taught how to say it, but if you say it differently and you're like, what is she talking about? Then hopefully these pictures will answer what I'm talking about. But I have heard people say it different ways, but Kalanchoe is the way that I always have pronounced it. And this is not something that people necessarily think of as a holiday plant, but it's actually becoming a little bit more popular in some places that you start to see them in stores a little bit more often than you used to. So for the growing conditions of Kalanchoe, again, this is going to be in the wintertime, it's going to be an indoor plant. I've seen them kind of around Valentine's Day, just kind of another option to extend your season inside. So they need full sun and well-drained potting soil. They will tolerate bright indoor light levels well, and the plants tend to get spindly in low light conditions because they're reaching for the sun. So we want them in a high light area. Ideal temperatures, again, do not go to drastic measures to change your air temperature in your house, but these are ideal temperatures. 45 to 65 degrees at night, 50 to 70 degrees during the day. And then cool night temperatures will prolong the flower life. So getting more of your flowering time from each plant. A media that we're going to suggest, any type of all-purpose potting mix can be used. The one that I have in the picture here is, again, Miracle-Gro, but it's an indoor potting mix. So different than the cactus mix. This is just specifically for indoor houseplants. It has a good mixture of potting media, of potting mix and different things that will help with drainage and that sort of thing. So that's a good option. Kalanchoes are succulents. They're in that family, so they grow best in a well-drained and well-aerated potting soil, such as 60% peat moss and 40% perlite. Or again, you can purchase something that's already made for you. The key is good drainage. If you've ever tried to grow succulents before, they do not like to be left moist and the soil wet. So we need very good drainage, or we're going to get root rot on our plants, and we do not want that. Kalanchoes can be damaged by overwatering. Like I just said, need to have very good drainage. Allow the soil to dry slightly between waterings. Fertilize actively growing plants with any houseplant fertilizer once a month. So actively growing plants is whenever you're going to fertilize, if that's even needed. But once a month with a houseplant fertilizer. There's a lot of houseplant fertilizers that are in little bottles that I don't really know what to describe them, but they're like little drops. You only put like 5 drops in the entire pot. So those are always nice to use, kind of a ready to use fertilizer for houseplants. Some issues, all plants have issues, especially houseplants have issues because they are in an environment that's a little different than nature, with wind and good airflow and all of that. So sometimes we have some issues with houseplants, and with Kalanchoe, one of the issues is root rot, usually resulting from a soil mix that does not drain quickly or from overwatering. So that's something that we can easily fix. Powdery mildew, it's difficult to recognize because a lot of times it will be very, very fine. It doesn't usually, when it gets to this point, it's really bad. Okay. So a lot of times it's happening long before we see all of this powdery substance on the leaves. But the leaves may be molted and have yellow spotting, dead flecks, lines or ring spot patterns that are appearing on the leaves. So if you see anything like that, you need to really, really inspect it and see if there is some powdery mildew going on. The plants may be stunted and they may not flower. To prevent, we want to allow for plenty of airflow around the plant material. And if you remember from these other pictures, that plant is very, very dense. So airflow is very important. Some insect issues, we have mealybugs and aphids and brown scale. So mealybugs are these nasty little creatures here. Aphids, which can be in lots of different colors. And then brown scale, which is basically like kind of attached itself to the stem or to the leaf. If we have that, we want to isolate any of those plants that are infected, and then we can treat those specific plants, because once it's on one plant, it's very easy to move from plant to plant to plant. Even if you have different types of house plants, it can very easily move from one to the other. If you had mealybugs, which is this little guy up here at the top, little furry creatures, you can control them by wiping them off with alcohol using a cotton swab. The alcohol can kind of penetrate through them and will kill. So after you're flowering, cut back tall growth and old flower stems. So we're just kind of pruning out the done, okay? Keep well watered in a sunny, warm window. After danger of frost, move outdoors to a bright, lightly shaded spot for the summer. And this is one plant that I highly suggest you move outside. It's a little less temperamental than some of the others that we've talked about. Gradually adjust them to the outdoor conditions so the tender leaves will not burn, and bring back indoors before the first frost or 3 months before the desired bloom time. So just like with the cactus, getting them to reflower is sometimes the issue. So they require short day lengths and long nights. So winter, late fall, winter, very early spring is requiring those short day lengths and long nights for the flower bud development. Natural day lengths between October 1st and March 1st allow the flower buds to form. During this time, keep the plant in a room where lights are not turned on during the naturally dark hours, or control day length by placing the plant in a closet in late afternoons and then bringing it out to a high light environment each morning. About 6 weeks of natural winter day lengths are required for flower buds to form. Natural winter day lengths will supply 14 to 16 hour night period. Temperatures above 80 degrees during the long night period can result in a heat delay inhibiting flower development. So if your house is really warm, I know some people keep their thermostat set pretty high. If it is pretty warm, that actually can inhibit your flower development if the temperature gets too high. After the flower buds are large enough to be seen above the foliage, day length is no longer crucial. At this time, we are going to place plants in any location regardless of night lighting. Plants exposed to naturally short day lengths, which is like October through March, should begin flowering by January. So again, lots and lots of steps to get them to reflower. Some people have better luck with this than others, but if you have had these before, if this is something that you want to try and you're having trouble with the reflowering process, then you might refer to some of these steps, and it might be something that you can do and have in your own home that will, I guess, mimic outdoors and try to get you some more flowers. But a lot of times our days are naturally long enough that you don't have a whole lot of issue. But if you have a really warm house or a really, you're keeping lights on all night and things like that, then that may need to be adjusted. Okay, next is the Norfolk Island pine. We have one of these here at the office, and it started off as a gift for someone several years ago. That was one of these little pots that you see whenever you go into grocery stores. A lot of times around Christmas, they'll have these and there'll be like glitter on them and sometimes a few little ornaments or a bow. They're really cute, but they can get massive. Okay. They can get very, very tall, even indoors. And ours is right by the front door where clientele are going in and out all the time. It gets all the weather hitting it when that door opens and closes. It does not get very good light, and it still has grown like crazy. I should have taken a picture of it. It's huge. But it is something that you see around Christmas time, and they are very festive, and you can definitely hold them over for years and years. And again, ours doesn't get very special treatment, and it's doing great. So the history of the Norfolk Island pine, it's not actually a pine at all. It's not in that family, but it somehow got that name. But the Norfolk Island pine is located in the South Pacific between Australia and New Zealand. It is an Australian territory, and on their flag, it features the Norfolk Island pine, which I think is pretty cool. And it is very, like I say, very popular around Christmas time here in America. The growing conditions, as much bright indirect light as you can give them. They can tolerate lower light levels, but need to be acclimated over time to lower levels. Moving a plant from bright light to low light all at once may cause entire branches to die and drop from the plant. And ours has literally been in the same spot without a whole lot of, it's filtered light all day long. And it always just kind of stayed there. So I guess it's stayed there and been happy there. So we haven't moved it, and it's happy. So they do like to have some extra humidity. Increasing your humidity can be done by filling a saucer with water and rocks or gravel and placing the plant on top without the pot touching the water. So we don't want it sitting in water, but we can add some water nearby to increase the humidity. For a larger group of plants, you might consider using a humidifier. Some houses get super dry, especially in the wintertime with the heat coming on, if you have gas heat especially. So a humidifier sometimes might be needed. The media that we're going to use, the growing mix, is going to be something that is more of a sandy type of soil, because they are naturally found along a coastline. We want to kind of mimic that. So I've showed this in another slide, but the cactus mix is a really good option that is going to be a good mixture for this type of plant. They do not tolerate wet feet, so we don't want to keep the soil very moist. Again, it's like more of a sandy consistency, something with very good drainage. And so you're only going to water it as needed. We can fertilize with a houseplant fertilizer as directed on the label. Some issues, as with a lot of evergreens, spider mites is a possibility that you might get. You want to definitely inspect the plants before you buy them. Make sure that there's no webbing or any little insects that you're seeing before you bring it home, because spider mites can definitely happen and you might bring it home without realizing it. So inspect the plants. Most likely there's something amiss with either the available light or too much moisture or too little moisture. So the plant is under stress, and then the spider mites, it's a good opportunity for them to kind of attack it. So just check it before you buy, and then just kind of monitor just like you would any of your plants, just to make sure that it's healthy. That was all for the Norfolk Island pine. That's not really a pine. The last plant that we're going to cover is probably the most popular, I would say, this time of year that we're starting to. I just saw some in the store this weekend whenever I went to the grocery. So they're starting to be around, even though Thanksgiving hasn't happened yet. And that is the poinsettia. So I'm sure you've all seen a poinsettia before. Very, very pretty. So many different varieties, lots of different colors, lots of different color combinations, some different blooming pattern, or not blooming, we'll talk about that in a moment, but a lot of different leaf patterns and leaf shape, and more just keeps changing and giving you more and more options for poinsettias. And here's a few more. So the history of the poinsettia, Montezuma, which is the last of the Aztec kings, he would have poinsettias brought into what is now Mexico City by caravans, because poinsettias could not be grown in the high altitude. And then Joel Roberts Poinsett, he was the first United States ambassador to Mexico. And at the time of his appointment, Mexico was involved in a civil war. During his stay in Mexico, he wandered the countryside looking for a new plant species. In 1828, he found a beautiful shrub with large red bracts growing next to a road. He took cuttings from the plant and brought them back to his greenhouse in South Carolina. Even though Poinsett had an outstanding career as a United States congressman and as an ambassador, he will always be remembered for introducing the poinsettia into the United States. So Joel Roberts Poinsett, if you notice his name, Poinsett, that is where we get our name poinsettia from. Here in Kentucky, a lot of us just say poinsettia, but the correct way to say it is poinsettia, and it is named after him. And he brought it back home and cultivated it. And then years later, in Southern California, I'm trying to remember the name of the family. They started really cultivating poinsettias, and that's where almost all of our varieties have come from. Ecke, I think, is their last name, and that's where pretty much all the royalties and things like that for the names, the name varieties come from, and they are who have done a lot of that cultivation process. Some poinsettia facts. Prior to popular belief, poinsettias are actually not poisonous. A study at OSU showed a 50-pound child would have to eat more than 500 leaves to have any harmful effect. Pets eating leaves can cause vomiting and diarrhea, but are not poisonous, and they taste awful. So it's not necessarily going to be something that they want to go back to. So the fact with the poisonous, it's not something that we need to eat. So it could make you sick. You could be allergic to it, which could make you sick. So, but for the people that say that they are poisonous, studies have shown that they in fact are not, but they're not going to be very tasty. The showy color parts of the poinsettias, so where we see this red, those are actually called bracts. A lot of people will say the red flowers of the poinsettia, and that is inaccurate. They are called bracts. They are a modified leaf, and that's just the botany of it. And then the flower is actually this little yellow part that we can see in here, and then you can see the other little yellow kind of like little buds on a stem. Those are the reproductive parts, and that's where your pollen is. But this is the actual flower, and the red or the pink or the white, whatever color your poinsettia may be, is actually not a leaf, and it is not a flower. It is a bract. There are more than 100 varieties of poinsettias available today. The Paul Ecke, that was the name I was looking for. The Paul Ecke Ranch in California grows over 70% of all poinsettias purchased in the United States and does about 50% of the worldwide sales of poinsettias. And again, they're the ones that have developed a lot of these cultivars. They will ooze a milky sap. So if you break a stem or if you break a leaf or you break a bract, there will be a milky sap that comes out of there. Some people with latex allergies have had a skin reaction from touching that sap in the leaves. So again, some people, I think that's why a lot of people think they're poisonous, because there are some things like that, but they're technically not poisonous. The growing conditions for poinsettias, we want to set them in a bright location so that it receives at least 6 hours of bright indirect sunlight each day. Excess heat will cause the leaves to yellow and fall off and the flower bracts to fade early. So be mindful of where you're sitting it inside your house. If you have a heat vent or any type of heater that is nearby, we want to place it in a different location to protect those leaves. The daytime temperature should not exceed 70 degrees. So a lot of times if it's in more of a, if you have a dining room, for example, that you only go into for, Sunday dinner or whatever it may be, so it's not as warm as other parts of the house, that might be a good location to put it. Do not put near drafts, excessive heat, or dry air from appliances, fireplaces, or ventilating ducts. Chilling injury, that's a very, very common problem with poinsettias, even from purchasing it inside the store and carrying it to your car. That's why they come with those sleeves on there. That's not just to help it make it easier to carry. That's also to protect it from chilling. Chilling injury is a problem and can cause premature leaf drop if the temperature drops below 50 degrees, which we are at now. So those plastic sleeves that come with it, then you're going to want to use those. The media that poinsettias are grown in it's going to have considerable amount of organic matter, such as compost or peat moss. Typically, we are not growing poinsettias. With all of the royalties and things with the cultivars, you are not legally allowed to take cuttings and sell the majority of poinsettias on the market. It is illegal to do so. So we are normally just getting poinsettias and bringing them home and trying to keep them nice through the holidays. But this is the type of potting mix that they're going to be in. So with water and fertilizer with our poinsettias, we want to, they're going to require moderately moist soil. So again, not letting them be super dry, but we also don't want them to be wet. We want moderately moist. Water thoroughly when the soil surface feels dry to the touch. Never let the potting mixture completely dry out, and never let the plant sit in standing water. When watering, always take the plant out of its decorative pot cover. So whenever we water, a lot of times our poinsettias will come in these pot covers that are, different colors. They could be red or green or gold or silver or whatever it may be. But if we water whenever it is sitting inside that, then the water is just going to stand, okay, in the bottom of that foil cover. And that's okay if we know that it's sucking it up. Like if you want to water it and then check, that's perfectly fine. But we don't want it just to end up sitting in water. So that's kind of up to you. It's recommended though, just to take it out of that cover, bring it over to the sink, water it, let the water drain, and then put it back into its pretty cover. Do not fertilize a poinsettia when it is in bloom. So 99% of us are not carrying over poinsettias, I would say. So we're just having them as long as they bloom and we're happy, and then we discard them. So we do not have to worry about fertilizing for our poinsettias if that is the case. Some issues that can happen with poinsettias, white flies, which are up here in this top left-hand corner, they're usually going to be below on the bottom side of the leaves. If you see things, little white things flying around, or if you take the poinsettia and gently shake it and you see flies, these little white specks flying around, then you probably have white flies. Good chance they came home with you from the store that you bought it. Spider mites we talked about in another topic, but this is just kind of what spider mite damage looks like on a poinsettia. Mealybugs, that's making an appearance again. This is some of the mealybugs on a stem, gross little fellas. And then soft scale. So we had hard scale earlier, and now we're talking about soft scales. So those are just some instances that you might see. The best thing you can do is really check the plant before you buy it, before you bring it into your house, because a lot of times these things have come from the greenhouse that they were grown in. So double check your plant, make sure it's all healthy, insect free before you ever bring it home. Root rotting fungi can occur in overwatered or poorly drained soil. So if you're watering it too much, you might end up with some root rot, which can kill your plant. From March to April, when the bracts, the colored part, when the bracts fade, we can prune the plant back to about 8 inches in height. Although the plant will look bare after pruning, eventually new growth will emerge from the nodes up and down the stem. Now, this slide is only needed if you are an individual that wants to keep their poinsettia from year to year. And I know some people do that. For me personally, that's a little too much work. I'm just not that interested. I'll just go buy a new one because they are more of an annual plant here. But it's totally fine if you want to do this. Here are some instructions on how to be successful with that. So we can keep it near a sunny window and continue to water it regularly during its growing period. We're going to fertilize it every 2 weeks during the spring, summer, and fall with a well-balanced complete fertilizer such as Triple 10. In early June, transplant the poinsettia into a container 2 to 4 inches bigger than the original pot. Pinch back the shoot tips or prune back the branches. Do not pinch back after September 1st. I've worked in a greenhouse where we have grown poinsettias from start to finish. They are a lot of work. And that is why I do not carry them over. I want a nice, healthy plant, and I just start with a new one each year. And that might be wasteful to some folks, but in this situation for me, I have been on the other side and it's just not worth it for me. So getting plants to reflower, and remember the flower are the little yellow centers, and along with that is the bracts turning their color. Again, this is if you're carrying over from year to year. Plants can be brought back into flower the next year, although this procedure is somewhat demanding. Starting the first week of October, for an 8 to 10 week period, the plant must be kept in total darkness for 14 continuous hours each night. Keep the plants in darkness by moving it to a closet or covering it with a large box. The plant must also receive 6 to 8 hours of bright sunlight daily. Depending on the response time of the particular cultivar, the plant will come into full bloom during November and December. So again, if you want to do that, more power to you, but sometimes it's just easier to get another one. So that concludes all of the different topics that we had. Feel free to start up with any questions. Ray or Jessica, if y'all want to, I don't know if Ray's still on here or not, but Jessica Besson, if we had any questions in the chat box.
Jessica Sayer, this is Sharon Flint. I made it in right on the seat, by the seat of my pants.
Okay. Sharon is the horticulture agent in Scott County. So she's, I think Sharon's going to help me with some questions then if anybody had any.
Well, really no questions so far in the chat box. Julie Steber said all of her, and this is referring to her cactus.
Okay.
She said all of hers are blooming now, so she now knows the difference.
Okay.
We were talking about Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Right.
And I had a question, and maybe you told it and I just missed it, but that window that you showed, that bay window with all the cactuses, all the large cactuses, was that your aunt's window?
No.
Oh, okay.
That was from a Google search.
Okay, well, that was beautiful. I was like, whoa,
She has,
that's beautiful.
She has usually around Thanksgiving, she will post a picture on Facebook or whatever. Excuse me. She only has one Thanksgiving cactus, but it's huge. It's absolutely huge. It's absolutely beautiful and covered in blooms.
I have a couple of Thanksgiving cactuses, and now I do send mine outside. And now they are in shade, sort of shade, more shade than sun, but and they're neglected. And then I bring them in and start watering them just about now, and they're budding up really big and starting to bloom. So
yeah,
mine live by neglect. So
a lot of times that works for people.
right.
Yeah, that happens. My poor little guy, it's been pretty neglected and it does not get the right amount of sun. And yeah, so.
Does anyone else have any questions? If you do, please unmute yourself.
I will share one thing about Christmas cactus, holiday cactus. We actually were talking about it today in our office. We have one that is purple. The leaves of it are purple.
Oh.
And but that is not a good thing.
Yeah, no.
That is a very, very stressed Christmas cactus, holiday cactus.
Yeah.
And we went over the different reasons why it could be purple, from lack of uneven watering, being pot bound too long, too much bright light, all of the above. Because a few people were like, wow, look at that beautiful purple Christmas cactus. And I was just like, oh no, that thing is saying, help me. So,
not what you want. Not what you want.
And it's managed to crank out one bud on it, but it looks pretty sad. So.
Okay.
I'm laughing because all these years I thought mine were just confused. I have one that blooms at Easter, and then they've all bloomed usually around Thanksgiving, and maybe one will put out a flower bud at Christmas. I was like, oh my, now I know.
So you have different kinds. Well, that is good to know. My aunt always thought that hers was a Christmas cactus, because that's what almost all the time, that's what you hear them called. And then a year or so ago, I posted something on our horticulture Facebook page, and she was like, oh, that's why mine always blooms at Thanksgiving. It's a Thanksgiving cactus. It's not a Christmas cactus. So hopefully that cleared up some terminology for everybody.